Nothing in this podcast or on our website should be construed as medical advice. Consult your healthcare provider for your individual nutritional and medical needs. The information presented is based on our research and is strictly that of the author and not necessarily those of any professional group or other individual.
Hi, I'm Sue Becker from Bread Beckers with Sue's Healthy Minutes. Today, I'm going to tell you why eating bread, but not just any bread that's found in the store, is not only healthy for you, but has helped countless Bread Beckers customers who wanted to make a healthy change in their lives and the lives of their family, and they succeeded. If you read the title of today's episode, Wart Stories, you might be thinking it's a typographical error. Surely it should read War Stories. Well, it's not an error. Some people have war stories for sure, but in today's episode, I'm going to share some amazing Wart stories, not just my own, but stories that others have shared with me over the years. I want to encourage you today to listen all the way to the end of the episode. These Wart stories aren't just great testimonies, but should encourage us all as I explain in detail the role of real bread and its health significance and relevance to the current crisis we are all facing today. I'll begin with my story. Years ago, long before the introduction of real bread into our home, when my oldest child was just 3 years old, she began to get warts, a few warts on her hands. I took her to our pediatrician, who told me that no treatment was necessary, that warts are caused by a virus and that they should run their course and go away on their own. I left very encouraged that no treatment was required and fully anticipating that they would be gone in a few weeks. But 3 years later, she still had warts. And not only that, they had now spread to her elbow as well as a fairly large one on the back of her heel. Other than being unsightly, they didn't really cause her much pain, except the one on the back of her heel. It was very painful for her to wear shoes, as the shoes rubbed the wart and causing it to bleed. And now, my 3-year-old son, her younger brother, was beginning to have warts show up as well. I felt I had given the warts ample time to run their course and that something at least needed to be done about the large wart on the back of her heel, since a 6-year-old really can't go without shoes all the time. So back to the pediatrician we went. This time, he referred me to a specialist who I fully anticipated would remove the wart somehow in one visit, at least the large painful one on her heel. Instead, we were given a liquid compound to apply to each of the warts every day and told to come back in a week. In theory, the liquid was going to basically burn the warts off of her skin. But this treatment burned her tender 6-year-old skin, resulting in many tears and great anxiety for both of us. Needless to say, we abandoned this treatment and simply returned to the doctor the next week, thinking that a better treatment option was surely available. Especially when I explained our dilemma of burning skin, tears, and not applying the medicine. But we left that week with a new idea of how to get the liquid on the warts. This went on for several weeks, even a few months, as each new attempted trick did not keep the liquid from burning her skin to the point of great pain, many tears, and anxiety for both of us. Each trip to the doctor was a bit traumatizing for Ashley as well. Though we explained that we had not been able to apply the liquid on the warts, he would pick at the warts to the point of bleeding to see if they were at all ready to fall off. Again, pain, tears, well, at this point, some screaming. On our final visit, Ashley actually began screaming in the parking lot. She knew what was coming. And again, explaining to the doctor that we could not apply the medicine, that it really burned her tender skin. Yet again, the doctor picked at the warts, causing even more screaming. Needless to say, at this point, I was a very distraught mother. Something that I thought would be a simple one-time trip to the doctor had turned into a nightmare. In desperation, I declared that something else surely could be done. The doctor agreed, but because Ashley was so traumatized, the doctor suggested that he put her to sleep to surgically remove at least the large wart on her heel. At this point, I decided this was not our best treatment option. It had now been several months of failed attempts, but we left that day with warts and all. On my drive home, a thought came to me. In my mind, I actually saw a sentence in a book I had read years ago by the renowned nutritionist and biochemist Adele Davis. The sentence that popped into my mind was, "Vitamin E has been known to get rid of warts." In my mind, I could almost see the page of the book with the sentence written on it. For years after graduating from college, fascinated with nutrition, I had studied the works of Adele Davis. Her studies and information on vitamin E had particularly interested me. She promoted the use of vitamin E to help with female-related issues. Well, since I struggled with terribly irregular cycles, if any at all, I started a regimen of vitamin E as suggested in Adele Davis's book. And in just a few short months, I began to have regular cycles. So on my ride home that day, when the sentence came to my mind, I became immediately excited. I was still taking vitamin E, so I had this treatment already at home. Now remember, all of this is before Real Bread. I started both Ashley and my son Caleb on vitamin E supplements. It only took about 1 week for Caleb's warts to go away, as they had only just begun showing up. But it still only took about 3 weeks for all of Ashley's warts to go completely away, even the large one on her heel. Gone in 3 weeks. What a better treatment plan than the traumatizing, fruitless months I had just spent trying to get rid of warts. We rejoiced and moved on with life without much further thought of warts until my third child, Joshua, was 3 years old and he began to get warts. Now, I've never been able to figure out the 3-year-old significance of warts appearing, but at least now I knew what to do. Vitamin E. Well, all should have been good, but much to my dismay, Joshua could not swallow the vitamin E capsules. I'm not sure why, as they are fairly small, smooth, little gelatin capsules. Nevertheless, Joshua gagged each time he tried to swallow them. So I simply gave up trying. Warts were not a priority in my life at this point, as Joshua now had 2 younger siblings. Yep, I had 3 children in just a little over 3 years. So we now had 5 children. Now, remember, all of this is before Real Bread. Well, 2 years go by and Joshua's warts have now spread and he has a very large one in the cuticle of his fingernail. Well, it's now 1991 when I was introduced to the health benefits of freshly milled flour and the concept of milling my grain, particularly wheat, to make my own bread. If you have listened to any of my previous episodes of Sue's Healthy Minutes, you will know this was the only change in our diet I made at the time. I added delicious real bread made from freshly milled flour to the real whole foods we were already enjoying. Over the years, I have regularly shared the health benefits that my family and particularly me experienced by simply changing the bread we were eating to the real bread I was now making. Well, one of those benefits is that my son Joshua's warts went completely away in the first month. I wasn't consciously feeding Joshua the bread so that his warts would go away. I honestly really didn't even think about it until after the fact. But one day, in the first month after eating real bread, I looked down at his hands and his warts were all gone without giving him a single vitamin E supplement. This certainly got my attention. I knew why the bread had helped my constipation, and now I understood why it had helped my energy levels, my sinus congestion, and sugar cravings. But warts, that was a new one for me. So I pulled out my books and I began to search. I learned that wheat particularly the wheat germ oil, is one of the richest food sources of vitamin E. But it is important that the flour be freshly milled, as the oil oxidizes quickly, breaking down many of the vitamins and nutrients, especially the vitamin E. In commercial processing, the wheat germ and the oil, as well as the bran, are removed to extend the flour's shelf life. And as we have discussed earlier, many valuable nutrients are lost in this process. I then realized that it was the real bread made from freshly milled flour that we were now consuming that was providing Joshua all the important nutrients, especially the vitamin E, that he needed to get rid of his warts, with no supplementation, no pills to swallow or try to swallow. Just delicious bread to eat that he loved, as we all did. It would be a little more than a year before we started our business, Bread Beckers, and as I began to teach and share our testimonies about the bread and the health benefits our family experienced, Joshua's wart story was certainly part of the talk. I shared these benefits boldly as I now knew the connection to the bread. I had learned so much. But one day, someone mentioned to me that I really shouldn't share the wart story in my teaching, that while all the other health benefits had a clear, scientific, and nutritional explanation, the wart story sounded a bit hokey and seemed to put a shadow on my credibility. I took the advice seriously and decided I would leave out that part of our testimony in my teaching. I certainly didn't want to sound like I was just offering some anecdotal folk remedy. A few weeks later, I was scheduled to do a workshop about the real bread at a homeschool conference. I had decided that I would not mention our amazing wart story, but God had other plans. About 15 minutes before I was to go speak, a sweet lady at the conference approached our booth. She told me that her husband was a doctor and that he had listened to the teaching on the free tape, cassette at the time, that we had given her the year before at this same conference. She had heard my teaching that year and bought a meal from us and began to make all her bread. She said her husband wanted her to tell me that all the information I was sharing about this bread was medically and scientifically correct. But she also wanted to share with me an amazing wart story. She had a dear friend that had a wart, a very large, ugly wart on her thumb. She had gone to the doctor to see if it could be removed, but to no avail. She was told that since it was so large and ingrown on her thumb, that it could not be removed without compromising the thumb. The doctor basically told her she would just have to live with the wart. Let's pause here for a moment and think about this. Remember, warts are a virus. Besides being unsightly, they are a virus that spreads. While you can, I guess, live with warts, why should you have to? And we should think about what we're actually living with, a virus. We would never dream of living with a virus that causes other symptoms such as a sore throat, fever, runny nose, and so on for years. Just something we need to think about. But back to our story. Her friend with the wart was visiting one day, and she had just made bread. She shared with her friend that she had heard this lady speak about vitamin E and this bread getting rid of her son's warts. So she offered her friend the loaves of bread she had just baked. Her friend was desperate and gladly accepted the offer, but hey, I don't know anyone that would turn down a couple of loaves of delicious homemade bread. What did she have to lose? She took the loaves of real bread and left. But this sweet lady wanted to encourage me by telling me that her friend ate the bread, and before she finished the first loaf of bread, the unsightly wart was going away. And by the time she finished the second loaf of bread, that huge, ugly wart was completely gone. Wow, what a wart story. Needless to say, I hurried on to my workshop where I decided to share my wart story, and I have never left it out since. As the years went by, we heard more and more wart stories. I continued to speak and teach at conferences all over the southeastern United States, and the wart stories remained a part of my presentations on the nutritional benefits of real bread. Sometimes, because of time constraints of my teaching slots at events, I could not always share our entire Wart story, but it was at least mentioned. Some years later, at a homeschool conference in Richmond, Virginia, we had the pleasure of being a part of yet another Wart story. I was teaching about real bread in my workshop at the convention. The workshop was entitled, "Do Not Eat the Bread of Idleness." At these conventions, I usually only have about 45 minutes to speak. So I was hurrying to cram 3 or 4 hours of information into my 45-minute time slot. I have to be selective as to what information I share. And as I was speaking, I decided I would skip the Wart story, but something in me hit pause, and I decided to share a shortened version, at least, of our Wart story. Then something amazing happened. It has never happened before or since. I came to a stopping point with about 5 minutes left of my workshop time. I'm usually scrambling to even end on time. But that day, I chose to end instead of trying to fit even more information into the 5 minutes I had left. This was unusual for me, but I decided to ask if anyone had any questions or something to share. 2 people raised their hands that day. Both shared their own testimonies of improved health from real bread, and both had Wart stories. One of the gentlemen who shared did admit that when he listened to my message on the free tape, well, now actually a CD, earlier that year, he thought the Wart information was a little strange, but totally identified with all the other health issues I discussed, like constipation, sinus congestion, and lack of energy. He understood the connection to commercially processed bread, and since he had all these issues, he was excited to begin his health journey with real bread by purchasing a grain mill and some wheat. He shared of the amazing health benefits that he experienced firsthand and rather quickly after introducing real bread into his diet. Then he laughed and said after a month or so of real bread, he noticed something very different about his hand. A wart that he had had for years was gone. He now shared that he no longer thought the Wart information was strange or hokey. The workshop ended, and I gathered my notes to leave the room. Waiting just outside the room was a woman and her beautiful 17-year-old daughter. She explained to me that she was walking past the room where my workshop was to be held, actually headed to a different workshop. She felt impressed by the Lord to go into my room. Because of the title, she thought it was a time and home management class, but she came in anyway. She listened as I presented the information, which included my Wart story and then the Wart story shared by these 2 others. She listened with tears forming in her eyes. She explained that her daughter was covered with over 500 warts. The warts started manifesting when her daughter was about 12 years old. They had gone to the doctor, tried several treatments, and even had them all burned off, only for them to return. Let me make a point here before we go on with this story. Warts are a manifestation of a viral infection. Cutting them off or burning them off does nothing to treat the virus. It only removes the manifestation or the symptom. That is why the warts most often come back when removed. The virus is still there. Anyway, back to our story. She also explained to me that her daughter had been on numerous medications and was currently on ulcer medication as they thought the persistent warts might be caused by stress. I will never forget her words that day as she told me she had been praying for an answer. She believed coming into my workshop that day was the answer to her prayers for her daughter's warts. She followed me back to our booth in the convention hall, tasted the bread, asked the price of the meal, and declared that she had paid more than that for one prescription drug to treat the warts that had done nothing for them. She then also declared that she liked to cook and her family liked to eat, so what did she have to lose? She said at least they could all enjoy some good bread, if nothing else. She left that day with a meal and some wheat. 2.5 weeks later. Yes, 2.5 weeks, I received a very excited phone call from this mom. She called to tell me that her daughter's 500 plus warts were all gone. She said that at about 2 weeks, the warts started itching. Her daughter was terrified at first, but then just a few days later, they all disappeared. She knew it was the bread. I knew it was the bread. The richest food source of vitamin E, real bread, had done it again. Several years later, the daughter, now a precious young mother, came to hear me speak at another event in Richmond, Virginia. She came up to me, pulled up her sleeves, and said, "Look, Mrs. Becker, still no warts." Over the years, we have heard so many wart stories just like these. A grandmother who kept her grandchildren after school started making her own bread from freshly milled flour after hearing me speak. She said her grandson, a very picky eater, would not eat the bread, but loved the flaxseed oatmeal cookies made with freshly milled flour from a recipe in my recipe collection cookbook. She made them so that he would enjoy a treat every day after school. She then went on to tell me that he had 36 warts on his hands. Though he wouldn't eat the bread, in 3 weeks of eating cookies made from freshly milled flour every day, his warts were all gone. I could go on and on with even more wart stories, but let's get to the science behind it all. How is it that vitamin E can so effectively get rid of a virus that causes warts? To understand, you have to know how a virus works, as well as the function of vitamin E in our body. Despite a wide variety of symptoms produced by a vitamin E deficiency, this vitamin appears to have one basic but critical function in the body, and that is to prevent fatty acids and other fat-like substances from being destroyed in the body by oxygen. We've all probably heard the term antioxidant. These fat-like substances include vitamin A, carotene, our pituitary hormones, our adrenal hormones, and our sex hormones, as well as essential unsaturated fatty acids. These essential unsaturated fatty acids make up not only part of the cell membrane of every cell in our body, but also the internal structure of every cell in our body, as well as the connective tissue that holds every cell in our body together. These fatty acids are responsible for many cellular functions in the body. As you might guess, vitamin E's protection of these essential fatty acids is critical to our most basic body systems and produces such benefits as preventing abnormal blood clotting inside our heart and our blood vessels, reducing the oxygen requirement of the body's tissue, ensuring normal capillary permeability, reducing excessive scar tissue formation, treating burns and other skin infections, and actually protecting the integrity of every cell in our body, just to name a few. We will look more extensively into some of these benefits of vitamin E in later episodes, but for today, we will focus on its important role as cell protector. The membrane of every cell in our body is made up of an essential fatty acid and protein layer. A deficiency in vitamin E causes a loss in the antioxidizing protection of the fatty acid component of the cell membrane. If the fatty acid component is destroyed by oxidation due to, say, a lack of vitamin E, this weakens the cell membrane, thereby weakening the cell. Vitamin E's role in protecting the essential fatty acid from being destroyed in the presence of oxygen will therefore protect the integrity of every cell in your body. Now you may be asking, how does this relate to a virus that manifests in warts? Unlike bacteria, Viruses cannot replicate on their own, but rather depend on a host cell's reproductive pathway. Therefore, a virus must invade our cells to reproduce and thrive within our body. If our cell membrane is compromised, it's more susceptible to viral invasion. Vitamin E's role then in protecting the integrity of every cell's membrane makes our cells less susceptible to a viral invasion and limits the virus's ability to further reproduce. A virus, such as one that causes warts, will therefore run its course quickly and the unsightly warts will go away. So, how does this relate to real bread made from freshly milled flour? Well, as stated earlier in this episode, wheat is one of the richest food sources of vitamin E, but the flour must be freshly milled as the vitamin E found in the wheat germ and oil are destroyed shortly after milling when exposed to oxygen. Vitamin E is also found in the oils of most grains, nuts, and seeds, but not 1 unit of vitamin E remains in oils that are chemically extracted, packaged cereal, or refined flour, and not 1 unit of vitamin E is added back to enriched flour products. The late Adele Davis, in her book, Let's Eat Right to Keep Fit, attributes the loss of vitamin E in our diets directly to the refining of flour by stating that our intake of vitamin E used to be about 150 units daily before wheat germ was discarded during the milling of flour, but it now averages only about 7 units per day. The late Dr. Wilfred Shute makes the same correlation in his book entitled Vitamin E for an Ailing and Healthy Heart. Dr. Wilfred Shute was a world-renowned cardiologist who pioneered vitamin E research along with his father and brother, also doctors. Dr. Shute wrote extensively of his use of vitamin E to treat heart disease, which we will also discuss in a later episode entitled Hope for the Heart. Mind you, Dr. Schute's book is not about flour milling, but about a vitamin E treatment protocol he used quite successfully to treat many health issues, especially heart disease. But here is his explanation of the cause of our many health issues as quoted from his writings. Historically, it is irrefutable that when new and more efficient milling methods were introduced into the manufacture of wheat flour, those methods permitting for the first time the complete stripping away of the highly perishable wheat germ, the diet of Western man lost its only significant source of vitamin E. Flour milling underwent this great change around the turn of the century and became general around 1910. The amount of vitamin E in the diet was greatly reduced, and with the loss of this natural antithrombin, coronary thrombosis appeared on the scene. It's the bread. It really is the bread, but only real bread. Nuts, seeds, cold-pressed oils, and real bread made from freshly milled flour are our most important food sources of vitamin E, our cell protector. Now, how do these Wart stories and this insight about vitamin E relate to the current crisis facing most of the world today? Several years ago, I began to really consider these Wart stories and how quickly real bread brought about healing from this virus that causes warts. This thought really struck me. If bread, real bread, made from freshly milled flour, our richest food source of vitamin E, could protect us and rid us so quickly of a virus that causes warts, what other viruses might it protect us from getting or allow us to recover from more quickly? I realize that today, more than ever, real bread and its abundant provision of vitamin E just might be the single most important part of our daily diet to protect us as much as possible from a viral invasion. I would like to close this episode today with one more story. Several years ago, I was again speaking at a homeschool convention. Again, I only had about 45 minutes. I was speaking very quickly to present as much information as possible in my allotted time. As I was sharing my Wart story that day, I described the frustration I felt many years before driving home in the car with my daughter Ashley after months of going to the doctor about her warts. As I was sharing about envisioning the sentence in the book about vitamin E being known to get rid of warts, I made a comment that I don't ever remember saying before. In my haste and excitement sharing the story, I said, I don't know why the Lord didn't remind me of this sentence before. It stunned me when I said it, but I had to keep going with my presentation. But the thought never left me. The next morning, I got up early like I do most mornings to spend some quiet time with the Lord. The thought from the previous day's presentation was still on my mind. I almost angrily asked the Lord a direct question. Lord, why didn't you remind me about the sentence in the book and the vitamin E and warts before I wasted all that time and energy and anxiety going to the doctor? In the stillness of that morning, I heard a very direct but gentle reply in my spirit. Because you never ask. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. I could almost see myself back on that day driving home with Ashley traumatized and myself frustrated and distraught. I have a feeling that in that moment of despair and frustration, I cried out to the Lord for an answer. And in that moment, He lovingly gave me the answer. Vitamin E has been known to get rid of warts. We hear it all the time at Bread Beckers. We hear, I was praying for an answer to my health issue, and I heard you speak, or someone gave me your CD, or I watched a video. I'm not sure why we wait until we are frustrated and in despair to cry out to the Lord for an answer. But I do know this, He will always give us the answer if we just ask. I hope this episode and every episode of Sue's Healthy Minutes might be the answer to your prayers for help and hope. Until next time, I'm Sue Becker from Bread Beckers with Sue's Healthy Minutes.
Sue's Healthy Minutes podcast has been a presentation by the Bread Beckers Incorporated located in Woodstock, Georgia. For more information, store hours, and learning opportunities, visit breadbeckers.com and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast and never miss an episode. Share this with 2 friends who would benefit from this information, and be sure to join us again next week for more of Sue's Healthy Minutes.